the State of ERP in 2026, how SAP is partnering with the Open Data Institute, and why your ERP vendor keeps blaming you for their failures. These are just a few of the topics we'll cover here in episode 267 of Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you.
3, 2, 1.
Ground control is a major tom.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, the tech-agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, including strategy, people, process, and technology. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys, including digital strategy, software selection, implementation planning, and the actual execution of their implementations. We also do project recoveries and expert witness work as well. So lots of good stuff we're going to talk about here in today's episode. Joining me, as always, is our co-host, Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, Eric, thanks for having me. I'm excited for today's episode.
Great show for you planned today. We're going to first get into a couple of social media questions that we received recently on social media outlets on the Third Stage and my own accounts as well. We're also going to get into some newsworthy topics, one of which is how SAP is partnering with the Open Data Institute, what that means to the industry. And then we're also going to talk about how Oracle is launching Fusion agentic applications. And then later in the show, we'll have Jon Reed on from Diginomica. He's going to be with me to talk about his industry analyst perspective as it relates to the state of ERP software in 2026. We'll get into everything related to AI, ERP systems, the blurring lines between AI and ERP, the future of ERP, where we're at today, all that good stuff we're going to talk about later in the show with Jon. And then finally, last in the show, we'll get into a topic that is top of mind for a lot of people, and that is why your ERP vendor keeps blaming you for their failures. This is something we haven't talked about before on this podcast, but we'll give you a little representation of how common it is for vendors to blame you, the client, the implementing organization, when things go wrong with their projects. But before we get into all that stuff, what are some of the social media questions you got for us here today, Darian?
We have some good social media questions today. The first one being, if the problem was never the tech, why do organizations keep making the same mistake? Is it about vendor influence, executive incentives, or something deeper in how companies think about change?
Well, that's a great question and something that I've been thinking a lot about, particularly as I've been working on my third book, which comes out later this month. It's a book called Welcome to the Machine, and in that book, I unpack this exact topic of why is it projects keep failing. Technology is getting better. We're all learning, presumably, from our past mistakes. So why is it that these failures keep happening? And not only are the failures still happening, but it's the same mistakes. It's not like these are new mistakes we're making. We're not solving the old mistakes and making new ones. We're making the same mistakes we were making 10, 20, 30 years ago as an industry. And what I think it is, and this is, I went deep into this when writing the book, in both in terms of my research and also just thinking through and observing for 30 years this industry. I think what it comes down to is a lot of the things you mentioned around vendor influence, executive interviews, or I'm sorry, not interviews, but executive incentives. And there's a lot of things at play here where the organizations have blind spots. The implementing organizations have blind spots. They might have their own biases, but a lot of times it's the blind spot of technology, not knowing technology and not being as adept or mature in technology as they could be. You take that combined with vendors who have their own self-interest to sell as much software as possible, as quickly as possible, and then system integrators who have the same incentive as the vendors, which is to implement as quickly as possible to get their services revenue up as quickly as possible. And they're also going to be pursuing the path of least resistance. So anything they can do to remove potential obstacles to accomplishing those tasks typically will involve mismanaging expectations. So they may not set out to mismanage expectations, but they do unintentionally in many cases by making implementations seem a lot easier than they are, by treating technology as somewhat of a silver bullet, by suggesting that the organization just needs to change. You know, if they want to be technologically modern, they just have to change and accept the way the software was built, regardless of whether or not it's good for their business. So those are the types of things that all come together into a into a machine. And I talk in the book about the machine of the tech industry and how it's a very well-oiled machine. It's very carefully constructed. There's ecosystems that support the vendor narrative. You've got industry analysts that are giving that third-party validation of how the vendors are right. The system integrators are touting the same thing. And so there's a lot of pressure on organizations. And so when you take the blind spots that these organizations have, typically they're going to fall prey to the self-interest and the economic self-interest of the vendors and the system integrators. So it's hard to blame any one party in this question, but I think it's usually a combination of all the above. But the matter or the question becomes, well, who's most at fault and how can we fix it? And that's something that I unpack in the book as well. And so that book, by the way, will be released later in April here this month on Amazon. So keep an eye out for that. We'll post it, links to it once it's available.
Yeah, you made some great points there. That's super interesting. I want to get into our next question though today, which is if the future belongs to composable architectures and incremental improvements, what happens to firms whose entire business model depends on selling complexity? Can they adapt, or are they structurally incapable of recommending simpler solutions?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's an age-old dilemma and philosophical debate that I don't know if it ever gets resolved, because I think it's almost like there's tension in the industry between the single monolithic ERP system that has a lot of benefit. It has a lot of integration benefits, a lot of commonality, standardization sorts of benefits. And then you've got composable ERP, which has their own benefits, which is speed, flexibility, the ability to maybe do things at lower risk, lower cost. And those two things are always going to be in conflict. And I think it's a healthy tension, healthy conflict back and forth. And I don't think there's a single answer. I think some vendors like SAP have responded to the composable trend by acquiring some best of breed types of solutions that you could argue is somewhat of a composable strategy. Like when they bought SuccessFactors, they bought Concur, Business Objects, and other technologies. In my mind, that was their way of saying, hey, this composable thing is real. Not everyone wants a one-size-fits-all single system. S/4HANA, in the case of SAP, can't do everything, so let's buy these other systems that plug some of the gaps. And other vendors have done the same thing. Oracle's been following that strategy for years, acquiring other companies. They've taken somewhat of a best-of-breed or composable ERP approach. So I think they are adapting. I think they're evolving. I just don't know. I'll be curious to see how well they're able to continue to adapt, because they are such big institutions and the technologies are so big and complex. I wonder if one side of this debate or one side of this tension will eventually end up, gaining most of the momentum. I don't think either model goes away completely. I think there's always going to be a space for both types of technologies, but I'm not sure where it'll head or who will win that battle, if anyone.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to get into a little bit of a different gear here and get into our first newsworthy article of the day, which is about how Oracle just announced Fusion Agentic Applications on March 24th. So this is a new class of enterprise apps powered by coordinated teams of AI agents that can reason, decide, and act with Oracle's cloud ERP, HR, payroll, and supply chain systems. Unlike copilots or AI assistants, these agents are embedded natively into the transactional system, giving them access to workflows, policies, approval hierarchies, and transactional context. Alongside this, Oracle launched AI Agent Studio and a new AI data platform to integrate non-Oracle data sources. Why this actually matters is this is Oracle's clearest move yet towards autonomous enterprise operations. Agents that don't just recommend actions, but execute them. The announcement includes 23 new agentic applications spanning financials, HR, and supply chain. However, an analyst at Gartner flagged two unresolved problems. Oracle's data integration across disparate repositories is not yet automated, and no vendor, Oracle included, has provided a clear answer on the liability when AI agents make consequential decisions at scale. The governance tooling, role-based access, audit trails, end-to-end traceability exists, but critics argue these are necessary but not sufficient when agents operate at enterprise speed. Overall, the takeaway here is that Oracle is betting on the future of enterprise software as autonomous agents, betting directly transactional systems, but the industry still has no framework for who is accountable when those agents make bad decisions at scale and speed. So a couple of questions I have for you, Eric, on this. First one being, if Oracle's agents can now reason, decide, and act inside ERP, who owns outcome when an agent makes material error in a financial close or supply chain decision?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think that's what people need to be aware of with AI. And I'll be curious to actually dive into this with our guest later in the show when we have Jon Reed on the show. I want to ask him about this topic. We're going to talk a lot about AI when we get to him on the show. But I think having the right governance in place is really important. You can't just let AI run awry and just run its own show. You have to have that human oversight, that human touch, that human trust but verify mentality. And so who owns it? I mean, that's a big question. That's a good question. But the key here is, I don't know, it doesn't matter who owns it necessarily, but someone needs to own it. And I think that's the problem right now, is that a lot of organizations aren't setting up the right organizational structure and governance to ensure that they've got the right person there to own it.
Yeah, that is super interesting. My other question I have with this, Eric, before we get into the next article is, Oracle says governance and auditability are built in, but is the audit trail enough? Can you trace a bad decision back through an AI agent's reasoning chain, the same way you can with a human approver?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends on the AI tool, but I would say that this is where ERP systems might have a bit of an advantage over pure AI tools. So companies like SAP, Oracle, Microsoft with their core ERP systems that are the core system of record. They manage all the workflows, the single source of truth for data. ERP systems are really good at tracking it through an audit trail. And so I think that's where you have to look at, who's best suited to provide the AI agents and the accountability and the auditability that we're looking for. This is where ERP may have a distinct advantage over other third-party AI tools you might consider, because they're so good at tracking every change, every transaction, largely because they were built for that reason. They were built to satisfy auditors and financial types. They were built for highly regulated industries that needed to have that audit trail. And so I think this is where, if you're in the financial services space, or if you're in a highly regulated industry, you might be more inclined to say, hey, look, I'm going to use an Oracle or another ERP system along with their AI agents, because I do have that audit trail maybe in a more predictable way than I would if I was using a standalone AI system.
Yeah, super interesting there with all things Oracle. I want to switch gears and get into a different newsworthy article, which talks about a different ERP vendor, SAP, and how they just announced their partnership with the Open Data Institute. So they partnered with, the collaboration is called the IDEA program, which is interchange for data and enterprise AI, which will develop independent governance certification, research guidance for CIOs and CDOs, and a cross-industry community to create open standards for AI-ready data infrastructure. So why this matters is, as agentic AI moves from demos to production, the quality of governance of underlying data becomes the bottleneck. Most enterprise data was designed for transactional records, reports, and compliance, structured for human compensation, not autonomous AI decision-making. Poor data quality leads to biased outputs and regulatory violations. SAP is positioning this not as a product launch, but as an ecosystem play, building the trust infrastructure that enterprises need before they confidently hand operational autonomy to AI systems. ODI CEO Louise Burke stated that competitive advantage will come from data quality, governance, and autonomy, not from AI models alone. Separately, SAP also announced its acquisition of Relato in March to further its AI data-ready strategy. Overall, the key takeaway I had from this article was SAP is making the argument that the real barrier to autonomous AI in enterprise isn't the models, it's the data beneath them. This partnership signals that data governance certification and open standards may become prerequisites before agentic AI can operate at scale. So, Eric, I have a couple questions to follow up with you on this article specifically, starting with, SAP is saying the real bottleneck for enterprise AI isn't the models, it's the data. Does that match for what you're seeing in client engagements? Or is this also a convenient narrative for SAP to slow down competitors who are shipping agents faster?
Yeah, I actually agree with SAP on this. It typically is not the models. I mean, the models aren't perfect. They're continuing to evolve. When you look at agentic AI, I know with SAP, they're investing tons of money and tons of capability into building out these agentic AI models. And so there's a lot there that they're doing. And again, it's not perfect, but compared to other ERP software vendors, SAP is actually pretty strong in this area. And so it does come down to data. And I think that's, again, back to the question we were talking about, um, the Oracle questions. That's where a lot of the value comes from is having clean data. And so this is where ERP vendors like Oracle, like SAP, have a distinct advantage over other AI competitors in that they kind of own the data. They own the core system of record. They own the workflows. And so if you've got good data, then now all of a sudden you've got a really good way to leverage AI in a way that's more predictable and more valuable to the organization. Without it, it becomes a lot more difficult. But I don't think it's a convenient narrative necessarily. I mean, it is convenient. It is a convenient narrative, but it's also reality, in my opinion, in that if you do have the right data, then chances are pretty high you're going to get the value you want out of your AI solution.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for sure. Super interesting. But my next question I have here before we get into our conversation today is ODI CEO says the competitive advantage comes from data quality, not AI models. If that's true, doesn't it favor incumbents like SAP who already sit on decades of enterprise data and disadvantage startups building better AI on top of messier data?
Yeah, actually, I do agree. I think this is where SAP and incumbents like SAP, whether it's Oracle or Microsoft or Workday, Infor, whoever it is, they all have that advantage of decades of enterprise data sitting in their systems, and the AI models are going to be that much more powerful. Again, assuming the data is accurate. If the data is not accurate, if you've got dirty data and the data is garbage, you're going to get that garbage in, garbage out phenomena that we hear us talk about a lot. And so I think that, another way that SAP and Oracle especially have distinct competitive advantages with their AI tool set is not just the historic data that each organization has, but the fact that these AI models from SAP and Oracle are being trained by tens of thousands of large organizations throughout the world. So that's just a massive amount of data that is training SAP's AI model and Oracle's AI model. Not just one individual's historic data, that's powerful in and of itself, but now when you look at SAP, for example, with tens of thousands of customers that have been using SAP products for 10, 20, 30 years, all that data can now be used to train AI. Now, granted, all that data is not automatically coming over to S4HANA or coming over to train their AI tools, but it gives you hopefully a sense of the magnitude of data and the power of that data, especially when you're talking about some of the world's largest organizations throughout the world. So I think that's a really strong and powerful currency that SAP has, and I'll be curious to see how they fare in this whole arms race as a result of that, the AI arms race, I should say.
Yeah, definitely super interesting. Thank you for answering those questions today. But I'm really excited to dive into this conversation.
Jon Reed from Diginomica is going to be on here in just a moment after we take a quick break. He's going to be on to talk about trends in the ERP space, the state of ERP as it is today, where we're going, where the hype is, what's real, what customers should be aware of. We're going to have a all-encompassing conversation. It's always fun to have him on the show. He's been on a few times, and he and I always have a fun time riffing on some of these trending topics. So really look forward to having him on the show. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola. C-O-L-A.
If you're leading a digital transformation or ERP initiative and you want to avoid the costly mistakes that most organizations make, that's where Third Stage Consulting comes in. We are an independent and technology advisory firm, meaning that we don't sell software, we don't take commissions from vendors. Our only job is to protect your interests and be on your side. We help executives and project teams plan, deliver, and recover digital transformations and ERP projects, reducing risk, improving adoption, and delivering real business value. If you want clarity before you commit to your digital strategy, or if something feels off track to you, feel free to reach out to us at thirdstage-consulting.com, and my team and I would be happy to help.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, the tech-agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. I'm excited for our next guest, Jon Reed from Diginomica, one of my favorite guests to have on the show.
Pleasure, Erica. Seems like every time you and I clash perspectives, we learn something. It's always fascinating. We come at the market from different directions, but I think we always find something. And I don't know, I guess we're probably both aligned in the sense that we feel like customers never get enough value in our industry. And I think that's the common thread that keeps us kind of sparking, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Keeps us having conversations like these just to dig into the good, the bad, the ugly of the industry. And I think
Exactly.
that's something I really appreciate having you on the show and just chatting with you in general. Just having a person like you as a sounding board in the industry, I think is super helpful and valuable, because you're right. It's you need more people like yourself that can just tell it like it is. And you're one of the few people that does that. So I'm really excited to have a fellow maverick / disruptor /
Right.
nuisance, or whatever people want to call us. Excited to have you here on the show today. But for those that don't know you, maybe some people have heard the name, maybe people have heard of Diginomica, maybe not. Tell us a little bit about yourself and about Diginomica, if you don't mind.
Well, let's keep this short so we can get into the meat of the topics, but we've been around for about 14 years, really focused on the issue of real world transformation. So what really matters for customers in our industry, and how do you get more successful products over the finish line? What do those look like? And what do the bad projects look like? And that's our broad editorial purview, I guess. And, I got my chops in the ERP world, going back to the 90s. But my role at Diginomica has been pretty expansive in the sense that transformation leads in a lot of different directions. And then in the last few years, I've become kind of an AI geek, sort of a love-hate thing, but definitely a deep research, because I felt like to really be effective and serve customers better, I needed to understand this particular technology. And so, so that's been a flavor in my coverage as well. I just put out a big piece on what's working and what's not in agentic AI projects, which we may refer to a little bit today. But anyway, so that kind of stuff keeps us all busy and active, and we're kind of straddle the fence between media and analyst firms. So we're starting to put out more and more of our own research, but we're trying to stay true to just trying to do things a little bit different. And we've survived a lot of waves of disruption ourselves, and hopefully we can keep doing that, because it hasn't been a super smooth ride for, I think, media enterprises. So it's kept us on our toes, but I'd like to think that we can keep going, because like you and I were discussing, it's like having those independent viewpoints and trying to build different kinds of business models in our industry that are more sustainable and driven by customer needs, and not like by big AI and big finance. So
Yeah, and it's interesting about your background too, is that how you grew up in the SAP space too, right? I mean, that's really where when I first met you, maybe 20 years ago, you were pretty deep in SAP, but since then you've really broadened, and you're more like me now. I'd say you're kind of looking at all different types of technologies and trends as in that media influencer role that you have.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I always spent a lot of time with the ERP landscape in general, but I did have a lot going on in SAP in particular. But I guess you could say kind of outgrew that a little bit, although I still cover that company pretty closely. But it just made more sense as I evolved in my ambitions to try to be broader in how I looked at the market. And when you look at transformation, you really need to look at it end to end. So I needed to spend a lot more time with CX. I've always spent a lot of time with skills and HR and talent, and then a lot of time in supply chain also, because it's about connecting the dots. That's the most interesting thing to me. And when I go to events, I do meet people who are much more like narrow focused. And I remember when I was a little more like that, and I'm glad I'm not. But there's advantages too to being narrow focused, because like you could probably have some guests on your show that were maybe a little bit more intimately following certain vendors than me these days. So pros and cons, right? But you try to find the way to make your voice the best for it can be, and there's no roadmap for that. You just have to follow your gut instincts, I guess.
Yeah. Well, speaking of gut instincts, let's jump into it. What are the, when you look at the ERP market over the last 12 months, or let's just call it the broader enterprise technology space over the last 12 months, what are the biggest shifts you're seeing? Or maybe the ones, I know there's AI, there's all agentic AI, all this other stuff everyone's talking about, but what's under the surface? What's kind of stuff are you seeing or thinking that is happening here in this space that we're not talking enough about that people should be aware of?
Well, you gave me like a preview of some of these questions. I was like, thanks, Eric. I have to tell you like what people are talking about right now besides AI, which is a hard question, but no, it's a good one though, because I do think there is more going on, and as much as I'm trying to dig into AI deeply, like it's really important to look at things that are not about that dynamic. I mean, I think one of the really overriding things right now in the ERP space that I think some people have missed is the degree to which we're really talking about vertical applications now and industry applications. I mean, every single vendor, when you listen to them, they will talk about the industries they're focusing on and the functionality they're trying to build for that. And this is honestly a long time coming, but basically what it is, I sometimes call it the death of the green screen, but it's just no longer tenable to have kind of a vanilla horizontal ERP that isn't catered to the needs of your industry. And more, you need to break down these application and data silos in order to be effective. And and by effective, what you really are thinking is, how do we serve our customers better? How can we adapt faster to market conditions? How can we adjust our business models faster? This is the nature of today's economy. It's volatile, it's difficult, and even the software of a few years ago feels archaic for the challenges we have now, let's face it, for the most part. And so you need something different and better. And a really good step is to have your vertical and your ERP running on the same platform instead of having your proprietary vertical software be this like separate older technology. It needs to run on the same, and more that should be a baseline expectation. I don't know if you feel this way because you advise buyers on this. I just don't see how you can upgrade your ERP and then have a separate vertical stuff going on. Now, granted, there are gonna over time, right? I mean, obviously you're gonna have some specialized vertical applications. I get that, but in general, this idea of running different vertical apps, I think is really an archaic notion. And some of the ERP vendors are still playing into more of a horizontal thing, and customers too. And I really think they need to stop. So that's sort of one of the biggest things that I would point to. I also think there's a kind of a scary / healthy lack of confidence in big ERP upgrades right now. And I say scary and healthy at the same time. And I'd love for you to help me pick this apart a little bit, because
Yeah.
I think on the one hand, I think it's really healthy to say, wait, like I don't I don't have an appetite for another mega project. Like where's the world going to be in 2 years, and why am I doing this mega project? So I think that's really healthy. But the scary part to me is that sometimes I think what I see a little bit is customers frozen in place by the pace of change and not able to press ahead with ambitious projects. And I'm not saying
Mm.
that the ERP migration should be that project, but I do get frustrated when I see a lack of ambition and appetite for change. And
Yeah.
I don't think it's good to get flatlined by these changes into a point of paralysis. And so I don't think that modernizing your ERP is necessarily the way forward for all customers, but I get a little disturbed when I see kind of a lack of appetite for anything ambitious in scope. And we could talk more about that. But so I think it's kind of a mix of like really healthy, but also a little scary.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a great point, and it's I tend to try to expose the hidden scary part because I don't think people think enough about that sometimes. But you're right. If you think too much about that, it can be easy to say, well, shit, if stuff's going to change so much, and if AI is going to disrupt everything, and we know this is a risky project, why? I'll just wait and see. I'll sit on the sideline and wait and see how technology evolves and develops. On the other hand, you don't want to. We have a lot of customers that are using, call it a legacy system. It's on-prem. They've only been using it for say 5 to 10 years. And I think those are the ones I worry about, because you're kind of in that middle ground where you haven't really gotten the full value out of what you already invested in, but
Yeah.
there's newer stuff out there. So how do you manage that? And I think the key is just, you've got to prioritize it just like any other investment, whether it's building a new factory or if you're going to do an acquisition or any other capital investment, you've just got to prioritize how important is an ERP or a
Right.
technology infrastructure modernization versus other stuff you might pursue. And I think only leadership within the organization can decide that. But it is a good point. It's a tricky balance that I haven't really seen before in my career.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I do make a little bit of an exception for AI sometimes because, like, AI is a conversation you do need to have as an organization because it gets at the core of how you feel about your human workers and what you want them to feel about their jobs. So you have to be talking about it, but I still maintain that transformation should be fundamentally technology free, the initial discussion, right? It shouldn't be about ERP. It shouldn't be about supply chain software. It shouldn't be about anything. It should be about what is our vision of how we're going to compete going forward? Who are we going to be? Who are we trying to serve? And what's getting in the way of that? How are we going to get there? You really can't have that be a technology centric conversation at first. And there's such a tendency to want to defer to your existing investments and your existing providers in that conversation. But I think you need to start at the top, which is one reason why I think I've always enjoyed your work, is because that's where you seem to enter the picture a lot of times, is before those conversations happen. And I think that's so healthy. And I still don't see enough of that. And when I go to events, probably a minority of the customers I interact with, like under 5%, can speak to an overall transformation strategy they're a part of and where they're headed. It's an idealistic thing to even run into that. And I'm just like, wait, aren't you aligned with what your company's trying to do as a whole? And it's like,
Yeah.
well, no, we're just trying to keep our heads above water, or we're just trying to help management understand this or that. And it's like, oh my God. I'm like, where are we going in this industry, Eric? We've been trying to get there our whole career. And like,
I know
so anyway.
you and I were at an event recently, and we were pontificating about how we're becoming the old cranky guys complaining about
I know.
how things are going in the industry, which is in some ways true. But what's interesting is you're hitting on a really, really important root cause that maybe addresses your first question, or that healthy, the thing that's healthy and scary at the same time around companies that are asking tough questions. They're asking the why, but it's leading a lot of organizations to have analysis paralysis. I wonder if the real issue isn't so much should I or shouldn't I take on this big mega project, or should I or shouldn't I improve my technology infrastructure, but more what you just said. Should I first just get my ducks in a row, get aligned, get in sync, get a clear vision and strategy for what I want this project to be, and then go execute it? Because I think that's the challenge, is the reason these projects are so scary and so risky and they have such a high failure rate isn't because the technology sucks. It's typically because the organizations can't consume it. They can't, or they just don't know what to expect when trying to consume it. So I wonder if that is the real answer, is not do you or don't you go through these mega projects, but more how do you do it in a way that fits your business, has a clear vision, has a clear strategy, just clarity in general. If you do that, then I think your likelihood of success is a lot higher.
So this is really interesting because, like, you and I are probably going to talk a bit about agentic AI and how that impacts the ERP space and all of that. But like, the role of technology versus culture and change in our industry is really interesting because, like, in like 1997, I think I was a new newsletter I was really excited about. In addition to, like, I had an SAP one, I think I might have had an ERP that I had extending the enterprise. And the whole idea was, I felt so strongly that to get this stuff right, you had to look beyond the walls of your own enterprise. You had to understand what your customers needed, what your suppliers needed. It needed to all be part of the same frame. And I think that was the right vision even back then. But let's be honest, the technology really wasn't there to support that. I mean, if you really tried, you could build some point to point integrations between maybe your supply chain and your ERP, or maybe your CRM and your ERP. But these were big, massive projects that weren't easy, right? But if you fast forward to today with that same vision, I think to a large extent, the technology is there to accomplish that now. So the technology really is not the barrier anymore.
Right.
And so it does enter this provocative question, which is, well, what is getting in the way? I mean, yes, some of the AI stuff is kind of half baked, and we can get into that, but there's enough good technology now to enable a lot of the things that you and I have always wanted. So when it doesn't happen, it gets kind of awkward because it's like, well, why aren't you there? And the answer lies, of course, in the complexities of culture and politics and business model alignment and just how you fit into your industry and your ecosystems where there can be some dominant players, and then how do you compete against them, and how do you find the ways to do that? And we're so much conditioned these days to these economies of scale in what we do. We commit to certain platforms on our phones or in how we do our shopping. And it presents a lot of competitive challenges for individual companies to figure out. And so, yeah, I don't see it very often, but I will say sometimes one things I know you and I ran into each other at Acumatica show, but one things I like about going down market sometimes is I find there's a better chance of having a refreshing conversation with an organization that's really on the same page,
Yeah.
but it might be a much smaller player. But it is really cool to 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 talk with an organization that really does have that. But in a larger enterprise, it's really, really hard to find an example of a big publicly traded company that's executing on all cylinders, that's not one of these tech behemoths.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, great point. And I think the key that you mentioned here is, throughout my career, I've always struggled with a very binary question of whose fault is it when these projects fail. It's got to be
Yep.
one party. It's got to be the client. It's probably the vendor, probably the system integrator. It's got to be one of those parties. And the more I evolve or just learn, I feel like it's the combination of all three. All three:
Yep.
the vendor, your implementer, you yourself, the implementing organization. It seems to come together to this perfect storm where you're all doing things that are leading to failure. Now, if you can break that cycle and break the machine of failure, then obviously you can be one of the ones that succeed. But it's hard, to your point. It's hard for especially a lot of big organizations to have the backbone and the foresight and the internal alignment to be able to make tough decisions that allow you to break that cycle. I think that's one of the big challenges that we see.
Yeah, and I tend to be defensive of customers in
Right.
this sort of triangle of this, just because they're a lot of times they're dealing with these massive consultancies and massive vendors with massive marketing budgets and massive amounts of data on their projects. And
And
so when the
influence too. Like
yeah,
a lot.
and when the projects go south, I tend to be like much more critical of the vendors and systems integrators than the customers. But I do acknowledge a lot of times that customers have a difficulty with this and then play the blame game. One of the things that I wish I could name the names here, because this is maybe offline we can do it, but some of you may know the names of these two personalities. But a number of years ago, there was an individual that was writing a lot about project failure and was essentially saying all three parties are to blame, right? And
Mhm.
that was the whole theme. And then another one of my colleagues took him to task and said, "Wait, that's not good enough, because if you have a car accident, for example, hopefully no one does, but someone goes out and assigns blame to that
Right.
situation and allocate fairly or not, they apportion the blame." And so
Right.
he said, you need to be apportioning blame. And where I came out of that dialogue from was that on a case by case basis, we need to have the courage to kind of say, not to point fingers at any one situation, but every situation is different, but there is differences. There's times where the customer has more accountability. There's times where the systems integrator does. But in general, it takes all these parties to screw up a project, and that's just the reality of it, you
Yeah,
know?
I totally agree. I'm going to come back to that point in a second here. I want to get to the audience though, and thank you to the audience for all your questions and comments so far. Patrick on LinkedIn says,
Hi,
"Hi Eric, hi
Patrick.
John, greetings from Poland. More than happy to hear about your perspective." Um, Jan Hendrick on LinkedIn says, "Hi Eric and John, it's great to be here. Would you shed some light on the AI terminating ERP topic?" Hold that thought, John, because I want to get to that because that's a big one.
Yes.
Is AI going
Okay.
to kill ERP? That's
Yes,
that's
we
the
will do
question.
that.
Darian on LinkedIn says, "Good morning, good morning, Darian." Sanjay on LinkedIn says, "Hello." Couple questions I'm going to skip over right now, but we'll come back to them. Um, here's an interesting comment from Juan Edgar on LinkedIn. Juan Edgar says, "An important point that perhaps requires an entire chapter is change management with people. Many expect a salary increase or promotion or simply to keep their old position, which often doesn't happen." Thank you for this interesting session. So very much in sync with what you just said about change management culture. Those are all things, and people obviously can influence and do influence the outcome.
And one thing that I talk with customers about is what I find fascinating is that customers don't approach AI, automation, and talent necessarily the way that I would. So I'll tell you what my bias is. I want to see customers competing by using these technologies to excuse me, to elevate people and to make them feel more fulfilled in their jobs and feel more empowered, and essentially use these technologies to take away things like admin and grunt work and help them do more. And they might have to change roles at times to achieve some of that, but I want to see them getting more of the good stuff, and I want clear communication on how we're using these tools, and we're not using them to surveil you and make you feel under a microscope. uh, but we're embracing a continuous improvement kind of world here, and we want you to be a part of it. And a lot of the companies that really inspire me on the smaller companies are really kind of doing that in their own way, though they don't always do it exactly like I would want. But what they're doing is they're communicating what that philosophy is, which gets back to this change comment, which is people have a right to know what kind of changes to expect, at least if you want them to perform well. And unfortunately, right now, what I'm seeing more than often than not is that we're just creating a new shinier hamster wheel for people. And you could talk about how great the tools are all they want, but people are scared and they're working their asses off. And maybe they're being more productive and maybe they're not. We could debate that in terms of AI work slop and stuff like that. But overall, I'm pretty uninspired by a lot of the examples that I'm seeing around that. And a proper change initiative should move beyond that and make people see, like, okay, look, like we may have to be a little more efficient here. We may not be able to hire as many people as we wanted for this team, but here's where we're headed. Here's where you can grow. Here's how you can have an impact. And I'm not seeing enough of that.
Yeah, I totally agree. So let's come back to this question then from Jan Hendrik on LinkedIn. Could you shed some light on AI terminating ERP topics? So in other words, maybe we just broaden the lens here and looking at this and look at it from an even broader perspective of how does AI fit in with ERP? Do I need to upgrade my ERP system to get to AI? Should I be implementing AI now, even if I've got a legacy system? Should I separate the two? AI and ERP is two different things. Will ERP get consumed by AI or vice versa? How do you see AI and ERP coexisting, or do they coexist?
So let's take a little while to unpack this one, because this one has a whole lot of dynamics to it. The short version is that using AI to rebuild transactional systems for the most part doesn't make sense, especially for larger organizations. AI sucks, for example, at building general ledgers. I just got back from an analyst event around AI for finance. AI doesn't really understand finance terminology. Vendors that have a depth of background in finance have a much better advantage when it comes to kind of building out AI on top of their platforms. But in general, I think you have to take a little bit of a step back and say, you know, in general, this AI versus ERP thing is a little bit of the wrong framing, but it is healthy from this perspective, which is that all the vendors in our industry have been a little too comfortable, and now they're not, and that's healthy. What's unhealthy is all the irrational market crap, like where, you know, you release Claude code or whatever, and a bunch of stocks take a pounding immediately. That's
Yeah.
not a healthy dynamic, because that's investors voting with their dollars who don't understand the enterprise and don't understand enterprise technology and don't understand that what you can build at home with Claude code over the weekend is not generally going to move the needle for organizations, especially in compliance-based industries that have a lot of strict issues around role-based access to information, all of that. You just can't build that stuff over the weekend. So that's not healthy. But what is healthy is that no one feels comfortable anymore. And one of my biggest disappointments, Eric, around SaaS is that while I'm a big advocate of multi-tenant cloud-based ERP and the economies of scale behind it for the most part, the fundamental industry issues never really changed. Like there's still so much friction engaging with vendors. Projects are still too expensive, and that needed disruption. And it's come, and that's really, really healthy. And so I welcome the conversation. I just don't like the investor market side of this is a little bit misleading. Now, when
Yeah.
when it comes to AI, like and the potential of AI, what are some of the things that people are drawn to in the enterprise context? Okay, well, one of them is making better decisions. So one of them is, can we, like, so the way AI works in an agentic capacity when we're talking about LLMs, LLM agents, and LLM decision making is being able to pull in information from a variety of sources that you never could really do before, both structured and unstructured information. And I love the idea of starting there and talking to executive teams and saying, when you're making supply chain decisions, what information do you need? Do you need information on ports? Do you need weather information? Do you need to combine that with your own internal supply chain? Like, how do you get all of that together? And if you can do that, that's pretty cool. And then there's this other part, which is more about automation, which is how can we just do stuff faster, better, and more efficiently? Now, how autonomous we can do it with these agents remains to be seen. And I talk about granular autonomy because I think we have to be careful with how much autonomy, how fast. So that's autonomous work is another piece. And the third piece is that I think is most exciting is business model reinvention and growth. How do we use these technologies to literally invent new business models? Now some of that can be a little bit rocky. So for example, with Walmart and OpenAI, this was really interesting because Walmart just dumped OpenAI in an experiment with integrating commerce directly into chats, right? So you see consumer behaviors changing. They're researching products in the context of their chats with OpenAI and other models. So why don't we just let them do checkout right from there, right? But the problem was that they didn't have enough of the data of availability and inventory, right? And so you're trying to check out, but you're not getting the proper information. And that in a nutshell is why a lot of these deals around the promise of agents go south is because they don't have access to enough of the information to fulfill what they need. And so so the other piece of that then is that Walmart's going to not giving up on this at all. Walmart's now going to try to do their own. They have, I think it's Sparky is the name of their, I can't remember, but they're going to feed it with their own real-time data. And so far they're seeing internally some better results. We'll see how that goes. But anyway, the point being, like, things are moving quickly. Now, the other thing that's really interesting that we have to put into this is the user experience component, right? And Eric, you're totally familiar with this one because ERP just never got user experience right. I don't care if it's on premise or SaaS or whatever. Now, look, some of the SaaS vendors have done a much better job with being able to do stuff on mobile and all of that. And some of the approval based functionality on mobile is really good. Like, I just approved some stuff while I was at my kid's soccer game or whatever. But in general, the user experience has just been unsatisfying. And so you can totally see the seductive temptation of, hey, you could just interact with the prompt and that will be it.
Yeah.
Like, and just ask for the information you need. It will take care of everything you want. And it's got a seductive power, but the problem is these are probabilistic systems that give the impression that they always do what you want, but the internet is rife with examples of where they don't. And so vendors have to figure out how to conquer all of that. So I'll wrap up this answer in a second, but in general, modern ERP, modern SaaS ERP is a really good basis for absorbing AI functionality because in the process of migrating to modern SaaS ERP, you had to do a lot of data quality work. So
Right.
it's not that SaaS ERP has some magical qualities. It's just that it enforced data discipline on the organization within the context of that area. And also, a lot of SaaS ERP did a really good job with workflow automation tools because they had a level of standardization. So, in fact, at the conference you and I were at, Eric, I went to a business rules automation session that had nothing to do with AI, that was standing room only. Like, people all over the back room because they know that they can set up all these deterministic automations within that context as well. And guess what? That's really powerful when it comes to agentic AI also because you can invoke more reliable automations with that agent. So the agent can ask you, do you want me to process this invoice? And instead of the agent trying to process it, it just invokes the workflow that's already built. And so that's why SaaS ERP can be an advantage, but that doesn't mean that you're necessarily screwed on older releases. It's just that what vendors need to prove now is that they're more than just data repositories. And anyway, there's no one right answer to all of this, and every customer is going to have to explore it for themselves.
I'm here with Jon Reed. We're talking about the state of ERP in 2026. We've got a lot more to cover. Stick around. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
When the soul of the city was laid to rest, and the nights forgotten.
If you're about to embark on the jungle of digital transformation, check out my new book, Welcome to the Jungle. It's a book that just came out in late 2025. It's my second book, and it's a book that focuses on digital transformation failure case studies and talks about the lessons and takeaways from that. It's 300 pages packed of all the lessons and things that I've learned from having been an expert witness in lawsuits related to digital transformations, and also with our team helping clients recover some of their failed projects. I've included as many lessons I could possibly fit into one book here. You can read this book. You can order it anywhere in the world in hard copy format, which is this format here. You can get it in paperback. You can also get it electronically as well. Scan the QR code right here or go to the links below for your copy. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, the tech-agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, digital strategy. I'm here with Jon Reed. We're talking about the state of ERP in 2026. You know, you bring up a really interesting point. This is why I love having you on the show and talk to you, Jon, because I always learn something new or just get a multiple aha moments. But one aha moment that comes to mind is that, you know, you've got this competing, these two competing schools of thought on how what technology should be. You know, on one hand, you've got AI, which is the allure, the sexy temptation to be able to just use a prompt and to hell with data structure, to hell with discipline. I can just use this chatbot or this agentic AI mechanism to do everything I need. I don't have to worry about transaction codes or finding stuff on a menu-driven thing anymore. I can just go ask a prompt. And then you've got ERP, which has always been really good at, for all the warts that ERP systems have. The one thing they're really good at is structure, workflows, systems of record, having a single source of truth. All that stuff has always been the appeal of ERP. And those two worlds are in conflict here. And I'm just curious, you know, how it ends up settling. You know, it's like on one hand, yeah, you've got to have that core backbone, that core infrastructure. But on the other hand, I guess here's another question for you, Jonathan. If I'm an SAP user, let's just say I'm on ECC, and I'm thinking about, do I go with S4HANA, go through, say, a 2, 3, 4 year implementation to then just maybe be able to use Joule and some of the agentic AI capabilities that SAP has invested tons of money in? Or is there something, or do I stay on ECC and try to use a different AI tool in some other way that's available to me now? Like, how do you see those two worlds coming together, at least in the short term? Because I think that's where a lot of our clients are struggling. Is, do I go all in on a new ERP? Do I just focus on AI? Do I have to do both?
So it's a really interesting question. And there's not easy answers to this. I mean, in the longer view, I'm not optimistic about your chances running legacy software for anything, whether it's ERP, CRM, supply chain, anything. I'm not optimistic, but not all legacy software is created equal either. I just talked with a vendor about this who has legacy footprint, and one of the things they're really going to focus on is putting really good APIs on top of that software, and
Mm.
that's going to enable more AI processes. Now, the vendor's taking a risk there because that just because you built APIs for that customer doesn't mean they're going to choose you.
Right.
But it's the proper risk to take for the customer. Now, here's the problem, Eric, which is that not all ECC customers are created equal. A lot of it comes down to how much customizing of the code you did, because AI needs a level of data quality, especially when it comes to transactional stuff. It can do a little better with unstructured information on, it's trained on the internet, for Christ's sakes. But for transactional systems and repeatable processes, it needs more of a quality standard than a lot of companies have indulged in. And whether or not you modernize your ERP, you can't get away from that core issue. So I don't care whether you choose a best of breed agentic player or SAP or one of their partners. If you're on an old software and it's heavily customized, you're going to struggle with next generation AI capabilities at scale. Now, you might be able to pick an area where you do have some quality and get started. Here's one of the interesting things that I've been giving SAP a hard time about, and they're starting to come around somewhat, is that some of this is a messaging issue, because you can actually access a fair amount of AI capabilities through BTP on older releases, including some Joule. So if I were talking with an SAP customer about upgrading, one of the things I would say is get started on AI now with SAP and tell SAP you want to see what you can do with their AI right now before you move. And so work with them to pick an area where you do have some decent level of data quality, and where you can work maybe with a partner or SAP or both to build some kind of AI driven application via BTP, or maybe using SAP's Business Data Cloud or some variation of that, or maybe a different platform of your choice that SAP works with, like Databricks or Azure or whatever, and build something that you need, build something that will help you. Maybe it's automating some invoice recognition in a way that you haven't been able to do in the past, or maybe it's some kind of supplier management triage where you alert suppliers to potential needs, or you get flagged with potential port lockups or whatever. But build something cool and useful now, and challenge SAP, or for that matter, any vendor in that situation, to demonstrate that they can do something now. Because in fact, there is not a technical barrier to it. And that's the misconception that has been put in the market. You don't have to do that to consume Joule. Now, look, a lot of vendors will enjoy a little bit of that confusion because they want you to upgrade, but there's a downside too. And what I tell vendors, including SAP, is you need to become an innovation partner to all of your customers right now without having to upgrade your ERP. Prove that they can innovate now. And that, if I'm a customer, I start there and see how well it goes. Because a lot of AI is so different than ERP. AI is very iterative. You have to constantly fine tune the models, constantly experiment with your data, constantly try different approaches to see if you're getting a better result. You're constantly tuning it. So get started and see. And if you really like the flavor of AI you get with SAP, well, that's one more argument for making the upgrade. But if you don't like the result, well, I think that's an argument for not doing the upgrade. And the other thing that I would do is I would press SAP on, the APIs that you need, not just for working with them, but working with any other vendor, and say, look, I don't know if I can move right now, but I want better data access inside my system. And, honestly, you got to do a bake off and see who has the best vision and what you're looking for. And this is how ERP has changed, Eric, is that you have to look at ERP much more now, not as a standalone application, but as a so-called ecosystem and a platform where the data considerations are crucial, and also how the partners are building. Because think of it this way: why would you want to work with a best of breed agentic player when you could work with a partner of your chosen vendor and continue to build on their platform? Because you have to think about what happens at scale. What happens when you have hundreds of these agents? Wouldn't it be better if they were all on the same platform?
Right.
So start seeing who has the healthiest platform, who has the best partners, and don't upgrade until you're starting to get satisfied that you have a future on that platform. And I think that's a radically different way of looking at upgrades that I think makes more sense.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And if I'm a software vendor, if I'm SAP in this example, I actually really like that strategy. I should like that strategy because now what you're doing is, okay, we tried for a few years now with the high stakes, all or nothing. You're not going to get support. You got to go to S4 HANA. Okay, you got a certain number of customers that bid on that and said, okay, we're moving to S4 HANA, and now we can be upgraded. We can be fully modernized. We can now use Joule, all that stuff. Even though, to your point, we could be using Joule anyway potentially. But set that aside for a second.
Right. Yeah.
So you've converted a certain number of our customers, but they're struggling to get that next wave. There's another wave that's kind of sitting there saying, I don't know, like I just finished my ECC implementation 5 years ago, not quite ready to invest 50 million in an S4 HANA implementation. What if you were to offer a more incremental buy-in? It's a way to keep these people engaged with your ecosystem. With SAP in this example, you keep them engaged with your brand, with your product, even if it doesn't mean right now they're moving everything over S4 HANA. So if you can give them Joule in a way that, okay, maybe it's not as lucrative as a big S4 HANA purchase, but you still got some more incremental revenue. You've for lack of a better word, you've locked them in a little bit more into your ecosystem. And eventually they're going to be more likely now to say, okay, this is pretty cool. If I did, now I can see the value of going to S4 HANA because now I've got a faster database, better data structure, all the benefits of S4 HANA. So I think it's a good strategy. If I'm a vendor and I just take a step back and listen to what you just said, that's a pretty solid strategy that I would think would build a lot more trust and would help this trust gap we're seeing in the industry too.
Yeah, and I've pushed this on a lot of vendors, including SAP, and it's generally been well received. And yeah, because vendors understand they need to be innovation partners to their customers, and they know that there's AI pure plays going into those older code bases and saying, look, we can do this for you. You don't have to move. And all I'm saying to warn customers about is be careful because AI is a referendum on your data quality. And if you have a messy, complicated legacy footprint, whether or not you upgrade, to a new ERP or not, you're going to be disappointed in your AI results when your data and application silos are everywhere. And I'm not making this up. We just published a couple things on this week, and we just published research from Valois on our site about all the data silos in CRM and how that's presenting this problem. And I just used the OpenAI example as well. So you have to reckon with the state of your data regardless. And so I just want to warn customers about that because you're going to be really, really disappointed. And what customers are doing is it's a mixed bag because I think they're getting seduced into trying to take some AI shortcuts. And you see it all the time with like putting up chatbots to give out wrong information and all of that. But then it's also sparking a healthy conversation, Eric. And this is where I think you and I, even though we might be skeptical of certain aspects of the technology, we can embrace this part, which is AI provokes finally the conversation around organizational silos that we've been wanting to have for so long. And now we can really have that conversation. And that's what I would urge customers is regardless of whether you upgrade your ERP or not, start having that conversation because you say, oh, SAP's clean core is a marketing gimmick. Okay, maybe it is, but honestly, they're right about moving towards a clean core in your product. Whether you ever go off on-prem software or not, for you may have reasons for air gap systems in your industry or whatever it is, but you need to stop accumulating technical debt in non-differentiating areas. And whether or not you ever do business with a vendor like SAP again, clean core is correct. That is the correct way to approach software. And you should differentiate with careful judgment and generally in an application mentality where you differentiate with applications, not custom code.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot in there in what you just said. I think, really important point about differentiating, the things that aren't important for you to customize. Absolutely. That's low hanging fruit to move to clean core now. But it's interesting to hear you say that the vendors are open to it. I do wonder if maybe the mentality of vendors will shift over time from being a pure product company that focuses so much on the roadmap, like, okay, S4HANA, let's convert as many people as we can to S4HANA. Who knows what's next after S4HANA? But and every vendor does it this way. It's a very sequential, linear, somewhat of a one size fits all path or a journey that we're trying to move our customers down. What if we were to say, look, we are a technology innovation company, like you said, and we just provide tools that might vary depending on where the client is and what their maturity is, what their appetite is, all that stuff. I think it's a different mindset that might actually serve the industry really well and avoid some of these one size fits all massive failures. You know, because a lot of reasons these failures happen because we're all trying to do the same thing when we all are different, right?
Yeah, prove to me I can innovate now and then let me think about making a big move. We've never thought of our industry that way before, and it's really healthy. And that's the healthy part of this conversation. And, you know, part of the reason they're open to it, Eric, of course, is because they're scared because they don't want to become an API call for someone else's AI driven relationship with their customer, right? Because whoever controls the user experience controls the relationship, right? And so if I'm going into your portal to do my work in my, whether it's an agentic thing or whatever, I have a real edge, and no one wants to become the back end data call to someone else's sexy next generation API platform. And so they're scared. And I would say to them, look, there's other vendors going in and making this pitch right now to your legacy customers. They get started with AI right now. Whereas your official marketing literature says that they have to upgrade first, like that they have to climb this 2 or 3 year mountain before they can consume your AI. Does that make any sense? Especially when you peel it back, there's almost no technical barriers to doing it now, as long as the data quality is there. Now, occasionally there are certain kinds of functionality that require certain release components, but it's incredibly minor. But some vendors listen, Eric, but the problem is, are they doing it in lockstep throughout their organization? Does it get across to marketing? Does marketing hit the right tone with it? But the whole idea is that if I'm a modern vendor, what do I want most from my customers? No matter what, I'm ERP, CRM, or whatever. I think those monikers are going to go away, by the way. But what I want are two things. I want to be perceived as an innovation partner, and I want to be perceived as a trusted platform. I want you to trust me as part of your platform landscape, and I want to be one of your go-tos. And so if that's your goal, then you got to do it now with your other customers. You can't make them jump through hoops anymore. Oh, and by the way, you have third-party maintenance providers extending these deadlines. So any customer that feels bullied into moving ahead, stop right now. You don't have to. Just stop.
Right.
Like these things have been pushed out extremely far now, 2040, I think. So you are not in a rush. Like, take your time with this.
Yeah, that's the key right there. Just do it on your own time frame. And I think the focus. I think what you're really touching on, it seems to me, is that you're focusing on getting us all focused on outcomes. You know, that's really what vendors should be thinking about as their product. Their product is business value. Their product is business transformation. It's not S4HANA. It's not Dynamics 365. It's not Oracle Fusion. That's not the product you're selling. And I think that's a problem with our industries. As a fellow tech guy or technologist, I get this, where you the shiny object, the sexy, cool thing, you're just so excited about it. You're focused on it. You're building a solution or a product versus an end outcome, which is what we should all be focused on.
Yeah, like in Seattle, where you and I were together, I interviewed a customer, and they essentially have to build a different business model for each client. Every client's sort of a custom job, and it's all automotive, but each one's a little different. And so I was like, I wanted to catch him in a customization riddle. So I was like, are you having to customize your software and redo all this stuff for each of these clients? And he was like, nope. Like, we've been able to do this in the context of our deployment, and we can tweak some things and do it differently for each customer. And I'm like, and they're not doing a lot of AI yet. They're going to do more, but that's what I want to hear. Like, I want to hear that you can move at the pace of today's markets with the platform that you have without being heavily reliant on IT. Because while I'm pretty skeptical of like a lot of AI vibe coding stuff, what I am really interested in is how to empower companies to move quickly and not accumulate technical debt in the process of doing that. And that, of course, is highly disruptive to the SIs that you and I have been, the large ones in particular, that you and I have been critical of for a very long time.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I want to come back to a related question from Darian on LinkedIn. She asked the question of, are we overestimating how fast AI will transform enterprise operations? And you started to touch on this earlier. You started touching upon how it's a bit of confusion and not a lot of clarity as far as how AI can impact or help organizations. Where do you see? What are your thoughts on this question? What's your knee-jerk reaction to that?
Oh yeah, I think we are overestimating. I mean, look, a lot of the so-called mass layoffs so far blamed on AI had nothing to do with AI, except for the fact that it's freeing up money for things like data center build outs and, the heavily celebrated Block AI layoffs. I've researched that extensively, and it looked to me like Block was trying to compensate for overhiring during the pandemic, which is a common bugaboo, and then being overinvested in crypto. It's their name is Block for blockchain, so that gives you some idea of how invested they are. So the point is like AI is not as near term disruptive. And one of the reasons, it's a great question by the way, and one of the reasons is because this generation of AI is so dependent on proper data and context, and the really impactful AI that we want needs that, because the generic productivity tools that we find in our office applications and stuff like that, let's be honest, they're not really changing how we do work all that much. I mean, it wrote an email for you with, I mean, come on.
Right.
Um, but one of the reasons for that, when I wrote my agentic AI projects piece that is live now on Diginomica, I outlined three things that are different about enterprise AI versus like the large frontier models. And more, getting enterprise AI right is less about these, massive frontier models. And it's about three things. It's about context at the time of inference, which means getting the best information at any moment in time for that particular company and user in a well-governed way. Yeah, the second thing is constraining LLMs in what I call a compound systems architecture, where it's not a standalone LLM, but it's connected with other forms of machine learning, deterministic workflow systems, which I refer to either external tool calls to verifiers, sources of database truth, knowledge graphs, things like that. And then a very promising distinction between off-the-shelf frontier models and domain-specific smaller models informed by relevant data. The smaller models can be much more targeted. I'm about to publish today about a finance specific model and what a difference that can make for finance users. But here's the thing, these three components and getting that built into AI is going to take a long time. That's not the AI that we've seen so far. So when you see the studies like PwC saying that, only 10% of AI products have seen a return on investment, and this was a survey of 4,000 CEOs, that, in my opinion, mostly harkens back to earlier generations of the technology that we've tried to use for more generic applications that hasn't worked. In fact, it's a pretty sophisticated architecture I just described. And most customers, Eric, can't build what I just laid out because it's complicated managing all of that stuff, accounting for model drift, diffusing larger models into smaller ones, training models on specific data, customizing them at scale for different customer needs. A typical customer can't get the most out of that. And so it's going to take a while. And so AI is not going to radically transform the landscape, but in the long run, it is going to be a part of how we do business. I don't think there's any question about that. And I just encourage companies to not to reject a lot of this autonomous enterprise, crap and just exaggeration, and look at, a more careful look at what can we automate, where can we apply our talent in the best ways, how do we make it all work. It's that talent automation balance is a big part of it. And then can we free up time not just for human relationships but also for next gen business model expansion and being more strategic and creative in how we do things. And if you can do that, you're on your way, but I haven't run into very many organizations that have reached that point yet.
Yeah, it's like we've missed the fundamentals, the core foundational stuff you need to do well and do right in this industry in order to succeed. So the technology can change and advance all at once, but we're going to continue to have these struggles until organizations figure out how to get that foundation right before they start building on it.
Yeah, and think of AI, think of today's AI systems as not truly intelligent, because if they were, they wouldn't need so much specific data all the time. That I call it a facsimile of intelligence because it resembles intelligence when you architect it properly, but it's not the same as human intelligence. It's not, you know, I only have to put my hand on a hot stove once to know not to do it again. Whereas with AI, you have to train it again and again, the same thing. And so for that reason, it takes a while to architect this. And And your messy enterprise is not a good fit with today's AI. So you have to find the areas where you're not as messy and where you're more precise, and then build from there. But the good news is that it can be iterative, and you can build on momentum. And so one of the things I talk about in my what's I have things that aren't working in AI projects and things that are. And one of the things that is working is what I call AI readiness, which is pick an area where your data isn't up to par and develop that and do some process improvement or some analytics improvements or whatever. But the key is when as you go, and we've documented so many case studies on diginomica of companies that have done just that, including nonprofits and companies that are on tight budgets, who have improved how they serve their constituents through these technologies, but gradually getting their house in order. And that's the exciting part. But while I think it's good to move away from mega projects, I don't think it's good to move away from a mega ambition to change. And that's the thing that I'm pushing back on a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I totally agree with you. I think those are all good points. What about you were talking about you were talking about, and you were just alluding to it again just a moment ago, John, about how AI essentially needs to be managed. And so we think about agentic AI in the enterprise. How do we leverage this cool technology in a way that makes us feel confident and comfortable that it's actually going to do what we want? So in other words, how do we be innovative but have the right guardrails and structure in place to make sure that we're managing AI? I think that's a muscle that a lot of organizations haven't figured out yet. Have you seen any tips or strategies that have worked there?
Well, so like there's a whole bunch of different components to it, but there's a clear sense of governance, right? Which is not just go wild with building agents or whatever, but thinking about how they're going to plug into a governance framework and working with vendors that can help you build that for yourself and make sure that you're in compliance with whatever you're going to need from an auditing framework and all of that. One of the reasons why these contextual forms of AI feeding data context into the language model works so well is that the context gives you some traceability on your data, and you can build that into as you go. I mean, I encourage companies to take a step back first and think about things like the risk levels, like the EU AI Act. Some companies are beholden to, but even if you're not, it's really helpful to look at the risks that they assign to different types of AI related activities. So why not start with some low risk stuff, but low risk stuff that is still going to have impact for your customers, right? Maybe you want to take on the where's my stuff problem in a whole new way, and help customers see or troubleshoot on some of their deliveries in real time or something. And maybe you find some low risk things you can work on that will give you some new opportunities. So low risk is key, and governance is key, and explainability is key. And then that iterative thing of starting small and evaluating results. But one of the biggest things is just knowing, like, where is the data getting pulled for these responses? What does the data architecture look like for me? And making sure, obviously, that the system's not going to train on your stuff, and that it's, because when you build this right, it doesn't have to train on your stuff. It just incorporates it at the time it makes a decision, but it doesn't become part of the model itself. And so anyway, you got to do all this homework. So you're going to need trusted partners. And so you probably can't do it on your own for the most part, unless you're a very sophisticated shop. So find partners that you trust, and I think it might be a combination of working with some of your existing providers, but also looking at new ones. But just be a little careful with the new ones, that they can speak to the overall data platform that you're building, instead of doing one-offs, because one-offs sound sexy at first. And I see all these on LinkedIn all the time. I just built this weekend for my company. I just blah, blah, blah. But what I'm missing is, how are you going to scale that and govern that in a secure way? And if you're not doing that discussion from the beginning, then I don't like your chances. And then, like I said, you need a philosophy on labor and talent, because if you're just taking an operational efficiency frame, you're not getting the most out of this technology. But also, a lot of times you're going in a headcount reduction mindset at the same time. Now, a lot of the customers that I talk with, they will tell you that when they're doing this properly, they're not hiring as many people. And so, okay, people are punching above their weight a little bit more. Maybe that's okay. But just kind of look after your workforce a little bit and figure out what your values are there. And my biggest advice is don't treat this like it's an inevitable thing. Oh, it's AI, it's going to take over my company. Like, dictate your own pace and your own comfort level with this technology, and do it in targeted ways, and build momentum, rather than treating it like, oh, we got to be the first. And I hate these AI first things, because I want people to develop a culture of experimentation. So one of the first things you need is a safe sandbox that people can play around with and bring their own ideas to light. But not the shadow AI sandbox, or playing around with Chat GPT with your data, but
Yeah.
a secure environment. Because if you don't provide that secure environment to experiment, people are just going to go off and do whatever they want.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. So looking forward, I mean, you and I have been doing this for close to the same amount of time. You look back over the last 30 years or so that you've been doing this. You've seen a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff has changed and evolved, and a lot of hype cycles that have busted and boomed. What do you see happening in the next 2 to 3 years? I mean, if you could predict the future, which is always a
Mm.
fun but futile exercise, but still fun to do. Where do you see this industry headed in the next 2 to 3 years? Big trends.
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, I think everyone's going to have to change, and I think some of it is good. I think, like, I really like that there's an increased focus on what value are we actually deriving. I think those are the questions we should have been asking all along. So I'm really glad to see those questions. I do think that we are probably going to see some differentiation between companies that really, like, kind of pursue these things as a discipline, versus, like, they just buy into the magic technology hype and try stuff that doesn't work. So I think it'll be really interesting to see if there's some new winners and losers that emerge from all of this. I mean, in the end, I don't think these product categories are gonna stand. I mean, I don't know if it's 2 years, but 5 or 10 years from now, it's hard to think about ERP and CRM and supply chain as these distinct systems. It feels more like composable workflows that we would want to have access to across different areas, that are building blocks for things we might want to build. I don't know if that's 2 years out, but that's probably a little further. But it does feel like we've outstayed our welcome with some of these acronyms. And some of that might be a really good thing, but we do have to be a little careful, because a lot of times when I get into these big pricing debates at these analyst events, I keep coming back to the fact that customers like predictability, and they might like new pricing models, but they also don't want to get stuck with a huge tab for consumption-based pricing and find out that their team was up all night, like, pushing the envelope with large language model, calls, and, like, running up a tab. So predictability has to factor in, right? And so somehow we have to find this balance. I'm not sure where it's all headed, but I think these kind of conversations to me are the key, and I'm going to be really interested to see, like I'm rooting for, like, human talent to triumph in a way, because I think these conversations we're having too much right now are too mechanistic, and I think ultimately it should be about helping us be better people and serve better and treat each other better. And I don't know if that's what's going to happen. So I think, man, I think we're going to see some really different examples. I think we're going to see some really dystopian examples, but I think we're going to see some really cool, interesting examples too. I mean, even with the same customer service agentic technology, I've seen projects that are totally dystopian, where you can never find a human ever again.
Right.
Even when you need them. And I've seen some that are really deployed really well, that seem to free people up from a lot of the routine stuff that was dragging them down, and get customers solving problems faster, but then talk to a human when they need to. And so much of this is about, like like we're going to get called out on what our values really are, because if we're not careful, like, this could bring out the worst in us, but I don't think it has to. So man, I'm not good with a crystal ball, though, Eric. I mean, every time I think I have one, there's tariffs, or there's a war, or
Right. A
I'm
pandemic.
sorry, I just can't give you a total good prediction. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I was hoping you had a different answer, because I have the same problem. It's like, just when you think you've got it figured out, or you're starting to see where things are headed, you realize you don't. And I think that's where we're at right now. Is everything we're talking about. I mean, everything we've had to discuss in this conversation, it points back to uncertainty, change. I think you opened up by talking about, your response to that question was, we all have to change. the industry, the customers, the buying customers, the people involved in this industry, we all have to change. And I think that's maybe the one constant, the one thing we can be certain of is that.
Yeah, and I would just say try to keep the markets at bay and stick with the game. One of my biggest fears, Eric, for vendors is that they get too distracted by the market valuations, and I think
Yes.
a lot of vendors are taking a pounding unfairly in some ways. And I've told vendors, just if you can stick with the long game of what you're trying to, how you're trying to serve customers, you're going to be okay. But if you get distracted by these market things, it's not going to be okay. So again, I think we all need a little more sanity in our lives, and that's to me the biggest thing is like, can we push back from this sort of like maelstrom of noise and still deliver value? So that's a challenge I'm taking on for myself and for Diginomica as a team. We are, and can we deliver on it? I don't know, but I do know that projects continue to need independent voices, and so these kind of conversations that you and I are having now, to me, are the priceless ones. And I like having them with customers too. And I hope customers seek out their own peers as well. We need to have diverse, open conversations all the time right now, not just at events. And so I'm really glad you have these virtual formats, because we lose track of this stuff in between events, and we shouldn't, because virtual does have some power to extend the conversations that we shouldn't ignore.
All right, great conversation, John. Really appreciate you being on the show here today. Always fun, always insightful and educational. We've got some more we're going to cover related to that conversation right after we take a quick break. And then we're also going to talk about why vendors tend to blame you, the implementing organization, for problems with your ERP implementation. So stick around. We'll be right back with more Transformation.
I'm Greg Benton. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Third Stage Consulting. And if you are embarking on your digital transformation journey or in the middle of that journey in 2026, you're going to want to see our digital transformation report. This latest edition really dives into a lot of the key trends that we're seeing in the marketplace and the ecosystem right now. It also highlights a number of the things that are happening with AI being an important component and integral part of the ERP systems that are leading the way right now. Also, the shift toward composable and best-of-breed cloud solutions is really accelerating the decline of monolithic ERP replacement. The opportunity to download the report is found at thirdstage-consulting.com. And you'll also find other tools that will help you in the initiatives and the business planning that you're doing for 2026. Don't leave Phase Zero without it. Reach out today.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or free guide that we published. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management, or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you, or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 267. My name's Eric Kimberlin, here with Darian Chwialkowski, and we just had the conversation here with Jonathan Reed talking about the state of ERP in 2026. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that conversation, Darian?
Yeah, what a great conversation today. I want to start out by saying I think the audience had a lot of great questions today, and just everybody is really curious as to how ERP is now developing in 2026. But Eric, I do have some follow-up questions specifically for you. First one being, are we overestimating how fast AI will actually transform enterprise operations, or are we just misunderstanding what real transformation looks like?
Well, I think it's actually a bit of both. I think we are overestimating how fast AI will actually transform enterprise operations. I think it's going to be a lot of fits and starts, a lot of messiness, and every organization is going to go through that until they get enough traction and enough solid use cases that then they can scale throughout the rest of the organization. Now, that's a lot easier said than done, because scaling something that on a small piloted basis across an entire enterprise or across an entire division of a company, that's no small feat. And so that's something that's the big if, and the assumption is that organizations will figure that out. So I think that's the key thing that we need to consider, is the fact that there's a lot of work ahead of us in terms of really scaling the use of AI across enterprises, especially if we're talking about using AI beyond just the basic, help me write an email, or, help me run this, or help me find this quick report or this data I'm looking for. Once you get past that into the real work, the real analysis, the real follow-up, the real manual and tedious work, that's where the real value of AI comes in. And we haven't yet seen organizations at scale take advantage of AI tools within their own organizations at scale.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And my next question I have to kind of wrap up this whole entire conversation is, what separates AI initiatives that actually create value from the ones that end up as cool demos that never scale?
Well, it's a good point, and I think I have two thoughts here. One is that you have to be prepared that some AI capabilities will just end up as cool demos. You might even try or pilot some of these capabilities within your organization, and it might be pretty cool. It might help, a person or a small group within your organization do some cool stuff, but it may not be applicable enough or digestible enough to the rest of the organization to scale it. So, and I think that's part of innovation, right? I mean, if you're innovating or if you're building competencies, there's a certain amount of testing and trying and trial and error that you have to do in order to determine what's going to work and what's not. So you have to be prepared for a certain amount of fits and starts and stuff that looks cool in a demo or in a pilot use case, and it may not be relevant to the rest of the organization. That's okay, but it's those occasional ones you hit on that are actual real business value, something that can scale, something that could be relatively easy for the rest of the organization to adapt. Those are the things that's why you're playing the game. You're not doing it because you want a 100% success rate. You're doing it because you need to test and try different technologies. And I think it's a cool time. It's an exciting time for organizations to have this level of innovation or this opportunity to innovate at this level. But I think it might be a bit overwhelming and in some cases demoralizing to organizations, because it's not as structured, it's not as predictable as a traditional ERP system or a traditional enterprise technology. And so you just have to change your mindset and recognize this is a new technology. There's a lot of unknowns, there's a lot of uncertainty around it, and there's a certain amount of trials and tribulations that are going to happen that might result in some fits and starts along the way. So now we want to play you this clip. It's a YouTube clip from my YouTube channel where I do a bit of a skit where I'm acting like a therapist for a CIO. And the CIO is struggling with getting blamed for the troubles that their digital transformation is facing. And so the whole premise here is I wanted to have somewhat of a light way of reenacting how organizations and leaders oftentimes get blamed for things that may or may not be their fault. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's things that are not their fault. It's actually a vendor problem, but they sort of transfer that responsibility onto, or that accountability or that perception onto their clients. So let's roll the video and then we'll come back and talk about it here real quick.
Welcome back. It's good to see you again. How have things been since our last session? Honestly, worse. Well, a lot worse. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Last time we talked, you were feeling overwhelmed by the ERP project, the vendor pressure, the internal politics, the lack of alignment. Did any of the things we discussed help? Some of it did, actually. I tried pushing back on the system integrator. I tried taking more ownership of the project, but then a whole set of new problems showed up that I wasn't expecting, and some of the old problems got worse. Tell me about that. What's gotten worse? Mainly change management, or should I say the complete lack of change management. When we first kicked off the project, the vendor assured us they would handle organizational change management. They said it was built into their methodology. They said they had it all covered. And they didn't? Not even close. Their idea of change management turned out to be sending a few company-wide emails, pulling together some generic system training materials, and checking a box on the project plan. That's it. No stakeholder engagement strategy, no communication plan tailored to different groups. No effort to actually understand how the change would impact people's day-to-day work. Nothing. So what happened? Exactly what you just expect. The people weren't prepared, the training was boilerplate, generic screenshots and click-through guides that didn't reflect how our business actually operates. Employees showed up on day one of testing and they had no idea what they were doing. They didn't understand why processes were changing. They didn't understand what was expected of them. And when things got confusing, there wasn't adequate support to help them through it. That sounds like a recipe for resistance. It is, and that's where it gets really frustrating because the vendor is turning around and blaming our people. They're telling the steering committee that the problem is user resistance and that our employees just don't want to change. They're literally labeling our people as the problem when the reality is that nobody ever prepared them for what was to be coming. So they failed to prepare people and they're blaming your people for not being prepared? Yeah, exactly. That's the cycle we're stuck in, and it gets worse. Every time we flag a gap, the training isn't relevant, the communications are too generic, people don't understand the new processes, the vendor response is always the same. They just say, your people are resistant to change. It's become the new catch-excuse, catchphrase for everything that seems to go wrong. The software doesn't work the way we need it to, must be resistance to change. The new process is actually less efficient than the old one, resistant to change. People are confused because nobody explained the why behind any of this, they must be resistant to change. It's the same refrain through and through. That sounds like gaslighting. Yeah, that's exactly what it is, and the worst part is it's working. The board is starting to believe it. The vendor has direct access to our executives, and they're telling them that the technology is fine, the methodology is fine, and that the real issue is the organizational culture. So now I've got my own leadership team questioning whether or not our people are the problem. How does that make you feel? It's infuriating because I know the people. They're not resistant to change. They're resistant to bad change, but they're not resistant to change. They're resistant to being told to adopt new processes that nobody bothered to explain. They're resistant to training materials that have nothing to do with how they do their actual jobs. They're resistant to being ignored when they raise legitimate concerns and then being told that the problem is their attitude. It just doesn't make sense. That's an important distinction. There's a difference between people who don't want to change and people who haven't been given the tools to change. Right, and the research backs this up. The number one root cause of ERP failure isn't the technology, it's that the people aren't prepared to adapt new processes. The technology usually works, but it's the human side that gets neglected. And that's exactly what's happening here with us. So the vendor took responsibility for change management, under-delivered, and is now deflecting the consequences onto your team. What about the systems integrator? Are they doing any better? They're part of the problem too. They're masters of avoiding accountability. They know we don't have the internal experience to look behind the curtain of how they're managing the project. So they control the narrative. The status report's all green until suddenly it's red one day. Risks that should have been flagged months ago show up out of nowhere. Milestones get missed and nobody escalates it to the steering committee until it's too late. Sounds like the fox guarding the hen house. You said something similar last time. It is, and I did say something about that last time. They've gotten even more aggressive since our last session. They're pushing incredibly hard to go live on the original date, even though we're not anywhere close to being ready. Our people aren't trained. Our data hasn't been migrated cleanly. We haven't done adequate user acceptance testing. But the integrator keeps telling us that we're ready and keeps pushing us into this go live. Why do you think they would push so hard to go live if you're not ready? Well, because their contract is structured around milestones. The faster we go live, the faster they get paid, and they move on to the next client. They don't bear the consequences of a bad go live. We do, but they don't. They'll be long gone by the time things hit the fan. We're the ones dealing with the operational disruption, confused employees, angry customers, and a system that doesn't work the way it should. And the software vendor, same incentives? Yeah, even more so. Once we go live, the subscription revenue kicks in. They start collecting their annual fees whether the system works or not. So they're just pushing us just as hard. The vendor and the integrator are actually aligned on this. Just go live as fast as possible. That's what they want, regardless of whether or not we're actually ready. And what's your incentive? Well, our incentive is to get it right. We want to minimize operational disruption, make sure people can actually do their jobs in the new system, get real business value from the investment, the things that should matter. Those are two very fundamentally conflicting incentives. They are, and nobody talks about it openly. It's this unspoken dynamic that drives the entire project. The vendor and the SI are optimizing for speed and revenue. We're trying to optimize for outcomes. And when those two things collide, we lose, because they control the project plan, the milestone, and the narrative to the executives. Let's go back to change management for a moment. You said the vendor's approach was inadequate. If you could design it yourself, what would real change management look like? It would start much earlier, for one thing. You can't wait until 3 or 4 weeks before go live before you start preparing people. It needs to begin during planning, helping people understand what's changing, why it's changing, what it means to their specific roles, not generic company-wide blast, targeted, relevant communication for different audiences. What else? Real training, hands-on training in realistic scenarios that reflect our actual business processes, not just how to click through the software and do transactions in the system. People need to understand the end-to-end process, not just their individual screen. And you need ongoing support for go live, not just a help desk email that nobody responds to. You need champions, people that are embedded in the business who can help their colleagues through the transition day to day. It sounds like you've thought about this quite a bit. I have, because I've seen what happens when you get it wrong. People lose confidence, they lose trust, they start doing workarounds and go back to the old way of doing things. And then leadership looks at the adoption numbers and wonders why the multi-million-dollar system isn't being used. The technology works, the people were just never set up to succeed. Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier that the board is starting to buy the vendor's narrative about resistance. How are you handling that? Pretty badly, actually, because the vendor has more access to the board than I'd like. They do these executive steering committee presentations where everything looks polished and under control. They use all the right buzzwords. They talk about organizational readiness and adoption curves and business value without actually doing the work behind the concepts. And then the board eats it up, and it sounds like it's very professional and reassuring when they hear it. And what happens when you present a different picture? I look like the pessimist. I'm not the expert in these projects, and so I must be wrong. And that's the perception that they give. I look like I'm the one who's slowing things down. The vendor has positioned themselves as the expert, so when I push back, it comes across as me not trusting the process. But I'm not pushing back because I don't trust the process. I'm pushing back because there is no process, not a real one that works for us anyway. That's a very isolating position to be in, it sounds like. It is, and the integrator makes it worse. They've got the subtle way of undermining our internal team. They frame everything as the client's responsibility when it fails and our methodology when it succeeds. They do things to the organization rather than with the organization. And when they eventually leave, we won't have built any internal capability. Everything will fall apart because they never transferred the knowledge to our team. They just executed tasks and they moved on. And that's a pattern you've seen in these relationships before? Yeah, constantly. When a vendor owns everything, you've got nothing but risk. You become completely dependent on them, and they know it. The dependency is just part of their business model. The more dependent you are, the harder it is to hold them accountable or to let them walk away. Now, have you considered bringing in someone independent, someone whose incentives are aligned with yours rather than the software vendors and the system integrators? I've thought about it. Last time we talked, you suggested the same thing. The problem is the integrator fights it. The last thing they want is an independent set of eyes looking at how they're running the project. They'll push back hard on any sort of third-party oversight. Wow. Why do you think that is? Well, because I think they know what an independent review would find. The gaps in change management, the missed milestones that were escalated, the training that was compressed by 50% because the milestone and timelines kept shifting, the status reports that painted a rosy picture while the project was quietly falling apart underneath. They don't want someone pulling back the curtain. So their resistance itself is a red flag, a massive one. And I think that's the thing I've struggled with the most. I keep second guessing myself because the vendor and the integrator are so confident, they're so polished, they're so certain that they're right. And when you're outnumbered and everyone around seems to agree with them, start to wonder if maybe you're the problem. Maybe you're the one that's resistant. Maybe you're not being flexible enough. Maybe you just don't underestimate or understand how the projects are supposed to work. But you do understand how they work. You've seen the data. You know the failure rates. You've lived through the consequences of what happens when you skip the hard work of preparing people for change. That's not resistance. That's wisdom. I appreciate you saying that. It's hard to hold on to that perspective when you're in the middle of it. Well, let me tell you what I'm hearing. You're not dealing with a team that's resistant to change. You're dealing with a team that was set up to fail by partners who overpromised on change management, underdelivered on training and communication, and are now deflecting the blame onto the people they were supposed to support. That's not an organizational problem. That's a vendor accountability problem. Well, when you put it that way, it does seem so obvious. It usually does from the outside. The hard part is seeing it clearly when you're inside the pressure cooker. So knowing what you know now, what are you going to do about it? I think I'm going to stop accepting the vendor's narrative. I need to go to the board with data, not opinions, but real data about where change management has failed, why adoption is low, and what needs to happen to fix it. And I need to push for an independent assessment of the project before we get much further. And what about the go live date? Well, we know it needs to move. I know that's going to be an uncomfortable conversation. The vendor will fight it. The integrator will fight it. The board won't love it, but going live before we're ready will cost us 10 times more than a delayed go live. I've seen the research. Over half of the projects experience some sort of operational disruption after the go live, and the ones that are hardest hit are the ones that are rushed before the people are ready. That takes a lot of courage. Are you prepared for the pushback that you think you might get? I think I have to be. This is our company. This is my team. These are real people whose job and livelihoods are affected by whether or not we get this right. The vendor and the integrator will move on to the next client. We're the ones that have to live with the consequences. That's exactly right. And I want you to remember something else. When someone tells you that every problem is your fault and that you just need to trust the process, that's not a partnership. That's control. A real partner helps you build the capability to succeed on your own. They work with you, not to you. That's a real powerful way to put it. I think I've been so deep in this that I lost what a healthy vendor relationship is actually supposed to look like. That's understandable. These dynamics are designed to keep you off balance, but you're seeing it clearly now, and that's the first step to changing it. Oh, thank you, doctor. I actually feel a little better this time. Oh, good. So see you same time next week? Absolutely, assuming the integrator doesn't try to bill me for that session too. Let's hope not.
So that was my video about why vendors, or how vendors oftentimes blame their customers for their own failures. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that conversation, Darian?
Yeah, I found this YouTube video very interesting. I think one key point that I took away from it was that the resistance to change is being misused as a scapegoat. So when you kind of said the resistance as a symptom, not the root problem, people aren't resistant to change, they're resistant to bad change. I found that super interesting. And in a world where things are changing so quickly right now, and for so many organizations, I think this is just a key point that we just have to keep highlighting over and over again. But a couple of follow-up questions I have overall from this video, Eric. One being, where should leadership draw the line between trusting vendors and challenging them?
Well, I think the first thing is, regardless of where you draw the line, I think the bigger and more overlooked thing is just to recognize that you have to do that. You have to do both. You have to trust vendors, and you also have to challenge them. And it may sound counterintuitive, like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but it is true. You do want to trust vendors, but you want to trust but verify. And the way I try to challenge leaders a lot of times to think about this is, think about if you're going to open a new distribution center. Say you're a distribution manufacturer and a distribution company. You need to open a new distribution center or a warehouse. You're going to open it in a new city. It's going to be 100,000 square feet. It's going to cost you, $10 million or whatever it is to implement. You're going to have robotics. You're going to have inventory you've got to manage. You've got to obviously build out the warehouse itself. You've got to build out the internal workflows or the physical layout of the warehouse. A lot you have to do, right? It would be unheard of for a COO or whoever's in charge of that new distribution center. It would be relatively unheard of that they would just say, look, we're just going to hire an expert to go take care of that for us. And you hire someone, they go design it, build it. Maybe once in a while they check in with you. You tell them what you think you want, and you let them handle most of it. Chances are much higher that the COO or whoever's in charge of that operation or that initiative are going to spend a lot more time trusting but verifying, maybe even micromanaging if they need to, because it's their business, it's a big investment, that sort of thing. But when it comes to a digital transformation or an ERP implementation, too often organizations just think, well, I don't know about technology. I'm not an expert, so I'm going to let the experts handle it. And that's a bad idea. You don't have to be an expert. I'm not expecting anyone to be an expert in technology. In fact, I would argue if you're not an expert, if you're more business-centric and you know nothing about technology, chances are pretty high you're going to be a much better leader than the technologists that, maybe they do or don't know business, but the person that's leading with technology is almost always going to be inferior or not deliver as well as the business-minded person. So I would say, I would actually challenge leaders listening to this to say that, look, if you're worried that you don't know about technology, you're actually in the best possible position to be leading this change, because now you can siphon through all the garbage and all the hype and all the unicorn, rainbows and unicorn type thinking that comes with technology, and you can focus on your business, and you're just going to have this uncanny ability to do that better than a CIO or a general technologist might be able to. So I think go with your instincts, go with your gut, treat your ERP project as you would any other large capital investment, and you'll be fine. The problem is most executives treat ERP projects completely different than they do other big capital investments.
Absolutely, that makes sense. And my last question of the day is on change management, and that's what should companies own internally versus rely on vendors for?
Well, let's start with what you want the vendors to manage, and let's isolate their scope here and sort of narrow down on it, because I think the tendency is to want to outsource everything or as much as possible to the vendor. What I would say is outsource as little as possible to the vendor. Focus on what they're good at. So your software vendor is good at designing, configuring, building, and testing technology. That's what they're good at. They're not good at program management. They might be good at project management. They might be good at being a technical lead or a technical architect that can manage that work stream, but they are not good at program management. So don't expect them to be good at program management, because they're not going to do a good job, and they probably don't even want to do it. They might just do it because it's extra money for them, but it's not something they're good at. They're not good at change management. They're typically not good at process improvement. And that may sound counterintuitive, because you think, well, they're the technologists. They should know how to improve our processes. They don't. They know how to build technology. They don't know how you should be improving your processes or could be improving your processes. There's also architecture, data integration, integration to third-party systems, managing the training, the end-user training. A lot of different stuff that goes into a successful project, and a small myopic part of that is what the vendor should be focused on. If you're asking them to do stuff outside of that, then that's where you get into trouble, because you're asking someone to do something they're not good at. And what I'm not saying, though, is I don't expect that every organization has all those capabilities in-house. So what you do instead is, instead of asking the technologist to do the change management stuff or the technologist to do the program management, go find people that are really good at that. Even if you don't have it internally, go find someone that can help you with the program management. Go find someone who's not the vendor to do the change management or help with the architecture, the data migration. It's the whole reason we as a company, and to shameless self-promotion here, the whole reason Third Stage is in business and why clients hire us is to fill those gaps, to fill those voids, because vendors are not good at all that other stuff. Now, we're not good at building technology in the way vendors are, so that's why the relationship works, and why that you need both parties. So you need the vendor to do what they're good at, and you need someone else to do all the other stuff that they're not good at.
Yeah, that was a great episode. Thank you.
Yeah, great discussion. I appreciate you being here with all the great questions, Darian. I appreciate the audience being here with the great questions, and of course, appreciate having Jon Reed on the show. If you'd like to watch more episodes of the show, check out transformationgroundcontrol.com. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on whichever platform you like to listen or watch. You can also just keep an eye on the website at Transformation Ground Control if you'd like. But either way, we hope to see you next week. New episodes every Wednesday. Be sure to check it out. Hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care.
Ground control is a major time.